Welcome to Dark Dreams.
Horrified Press. horrifiedpress.wordpress.com.
The moon is full and it is dripping with blood.
Now comes Blood Moon Rising magazine.
Original fiction,
Creature features,
nightmarish artwork.
interviews, and other original horror.
Visit bloodmoonrisingmagazine.com and join our rising legion.
Letting the Demons Out by WALLACE. There is a hole in my head about 2 inches behind and below the crown. My father put it there when I was 8 years old. He said the Lord had told him in a dream it would let the demons out. He used a scalpel to open the skin and then a drill to start the hole, a chisel to widen it, sewed the skin shut over it, said the demons could pass through flesh much easier than bone. I believed him. I believed everything he told me because he was a man of God and he couldn't tell a lie, especially to his own son. Like when he said that Mother was possessed by demons of her own, was how they had gotten into me while I was still in the womb. How her demons would make her do bad things, would make her go out and fornicate with other men, dirty, evil men. I remember the night we waited up for her, how she had come stumbling through the door, stinking of cigarette smoke and alcohol, how my father had grabbed her, how I had helped carry her down to the basement. Earlier we'd brought a table down there, a picnic table the 3 of us used to sit at in the backyard. Sometimes we would cook out and eat dinner there and listen to the crickets as the sun went down, back before my mother lost the war with her demons and started doing all the terrible things Father told me about. In the basement we laid her on the table and tied her down. All the while she cursed and shrieked until my father stuck a rag in her mouth, looked at me with a grave expression on his face, and said those were the demons talking. He ran his hand over her hair, told her that what he was about to do was for her own good, that everything would be better soon, that everything would be the way it used to be. I was in charge of holding her head still. She passed out when the drill bit into her skull. That made my job much easier. There was a lot of blood. The sight of it made me a little queasy, but I would not fail my father. I stood there and I held my mother's head in my hands, and I watched my father pick up the chisel and the hammer. As he went about his work, I remembered the way it had felt when it had been done to me. All of it. I hadn't passed out, and I was glad for my mother that she had. The pain had been severe, to say the least. It was a small price to pay, though, to be free of my demons. I couldn't wait to see Mother when she was free of hers. I was looking forward to having the mother of my early childhood return to me. We would have dinner in the backyard. We would go to the movies and the park and the beach, and I would watch Mother and Father smile at each other. Would smile at them when they looked my way. Yeah, just like it used to be. Father's hands were shaking as he held the chisel, as he brought the hammer down. Was he fighting demons of his own? No, impossible. He was a man of God. No demon would dare enter him. He swung the hammer. Too hard. Yes, too hard by far, and about 1.5 inches of the chisel sank into my mother's head. Miraculously, she didn't die. But we never did have dinner in the backyard again. We never went to the movies or the park or the beach. Mother couldn't speak after that night. She couldn't eat on her own either, or go to the bathroom. She would just sit there in front of the TV, spittle dripping from her chin. Sometimes she would moan. Several times a day, she would soil herself. Father didn't really say much after that night either. Something had changed in him. He wore a haunted look on his face, seemed to have some trouble recalling where he was at times, even who he was. It was scary to see him like that. 2 years later, I turned 17, graduated from high school and moved out, left behind the quiet little town where I had grown up. I never saw my parents again. They said that the fire was an accident, that my father must have fallen asleep with a lit cigarette in his hand. In all the years I lived there, I had never seen the man so much as even touch a tobacco product, let alone use one. But I kept my mouth shut about it. Didn't want to get involved. What would have been the point? After making my way by bus to a nearby city, I got a job waiting tables at an all-night diner. Found the cheapest apartment available. Actually, it was a little more than a room with a communal bathroom down at the end of the hall. The place was infested with roaches, and it smelled of mildew, but it was home. There was a church down the street. It was part of a strip mall. There was a cross painted on the front window next to a flashing neon sign that said, Church of the Living God. I started attending services there. The preacher was a black man named Father Isaac, which made me a bit wary at first, as Father used to tell me to never trust a colored person. I came to find out that he was a nice enough fellow, as were most of the blacks who were part of the congregation. They were there to worship the Lord, and so was I. And when it came down to it, that was all that really mattered. Looking back, I find that my memories of that place are quite fond. It was a much different church than the one Father used to take me to. That had been a cold and joyless place, a place of solemn worship. Not so the Church of the Living God. Father Isaac was a fiery preacher, would often leave the pulpit, would come down among his flock and join in singing praises to Jesus Christ. There were a lot of hallelujahs shouted in that room, a lot of praise the Lords. Eventually, I found a better job running a printing press for one of the city's smaller newspapers, moved into a nicer apartment on the other side of town. I started attending a different church closer to where I lived. Fellowship Baptist Church, it was called. It had its own building with a steeple and everything. Mostly white people went there. I would sit towards the back and listen in silent awe to the words of Pastor Williams, a great bear of a man with a voice one could imagine emanating from the burning bush. The teachings of the good book came alive when he spoke them, seemed to be coming to my ears through a direct link to the Lord above himself. I had been attending about 10 months of Sunday services there, sitting in my usual spot, when I was surprised to find an attractive blonde girl who looked to be close to my own age, sitting in the pew next to me. She gave me a shy smile when I looked at her, a smile that made my palms sweat and my heart skip a beat. When the sermon was over, she turned to me, held out her hand, and said, "Stacy Rhodes, Stacy with an E." I told her my name then, unsure of what was expected of me, took her hand in mine, brought it to my lips, and gave it a light kiss. She giggled and said, "My, how forward!" I could feel myself blushing furiously, which only made her giggle all the harder. Finally I laughed, and we stood and walked outside, where Stacy informed me that she was attending the local state college, had no religious friends there, at least none religious enough to actually go to church. How she had decided to come to today's church service alone. "Well, I hope to see you here again," I said. Now I really was being forward. To my secret elation, I saw her again the following week. 2 weeks after that, the Lord granted me the strength to ask her out. "I was wondering when you'd find the nerve," she teased me. That Friday, she picked me up in the little sports car her father had bought her as a going-off-to-college present. I didn't have a car of my own, nor a driver's license, for that matter. In the city, I had discovered, one didn't really need either to get around. We went to dinner, then to a movie where Stacy kissed me, and I fell in love. We went out together the following weekend and the weekend after that. A month after I had first met her, at the end of yet another date, she asked if we could go back to my place. Sure, I said, and the moment we were there, the moment the door closed behind us, she was in my arms, and our lips and bodies met, and I thought that I was actually going to die right then and there. Within moments, we were both naked, and I was touching the bare flesh of a woman for the first time, and I knew that it was wrong, that two people should be married before they were together in that way. But right then, I didn't care. I was trembling as she pulled me down onto the couch and said, "Are you a virgin?" I nodded. No false bravado there. Then she said, "Trust me, it will be all right." She smiled. "It will be more than all right." And it was. 6 months later, I asked Stacy to marry me, and she said, "I was wondering when you'd find the nerve." And we laughed, and I figured that I had to be the happiest man in the world. 4 years have passed since we exchanged I-do's, and I made an honest woman, her words, not mine, out of my beloved Stacy. The 4 best years of my life. After graduating college with better-than-average grades, my wife got a well-paying job designing software apps for a prominent computing firm. I am now the head typesetter at the newspaper where I started out running one of the presses. Make a more than decent salary myself. We purchased a house in the suburbs, and I finally learned how to drive. Bought a flashy little Nissan 2-door. Stacy drives a sports utility vehicle. We still attend Fellowship Baptist Church. Last week, Stacy went upstate on a business trip. She was only gone a couple of days, but I missed her so much. She is my world. She means everything to me. The other night, while Stacy was taking a shower, I decided to go through her purse. I don't know why. Something made me want to. Maybe it was my guardian angel whispering in my ear. Among the makeup and the tampons and the spare change, there was a sheet of paper. On it, the name Jacob was handwritten. Below the name was a phone number, a local number. "Were you going through my things?" she wanted to know when I asked her who Jacob was. "How dare you?" So much anger there, unlike anything I had ever seen in her before. I knew it wasn't my Stacy talking to me like that. "If you must know, he is a business associate, nothing more." The venom in her voice, not like her at all. No, more like something demonic. This morning I called in sick to work. Then I went down to the local hardware store. There I bought a length of rope, a drill, a chisel, and a hammer. I came home and pulled the cloth off the dining room table. It's a heavy table, made of oak, more than sturdy enough to support the weight of a fairly small woman. I find myself wondering, not for the first time, what this Jacob fellow looks like. My hands start to tremble every time I think about him, every time I think about them, so I have to force myself to stop. Because all too soon my Stacy will be home from work, and then it will be time to let the demons out.
I say every house in America should have an electric chair. And every man just once in his life should sit in it, just so that he can feel the power of millions of gallons of electricity flow through his veins. I got an electric chair, that's all I need. You get an electric chair, Sheldon, you don't have to worry about the audience. You get an electric chair, you can tell them anything you want, as long as it's real. You get yourself an electric chair and they'll sit there all night long. Kind of a funny idea, sitting in an electric chair and doing a show. Well, think of the therapeutic value of an electric chair and all the money it is. Yes, sir, an electric chair in every home.
The Electric Chair, a show about horror, electricchairshow.com.
Electric chair. Wow.
The Possession of Eddie Walker by Nathan Jonathan David Lee ROWARK. Available now on Amazon and Lulu.com. There's a man that lives at the end of our street who no one knows or dares to meet. He wields a crutch to help move his feet. He takes walks late at night while our neighbours sleep. A flat peak cap hides his face from the dark. A red beard pokes out from beneath in an arc. The heels of his shoes scar the pavement a mark. The dogs on his route hear him coming and bark. Those of us up to watch his endless routine begin to imagine the things that he's seen. When we retire ourselves and settle to dream, is it through his eyes still open we study the scene? Does he guard our nightmares or suffer their show? Is his job to recall them so others shall know? Or is the man that travels the pavements below ourselves in the mirror of our window? Chapter 1. Home Alone. Now, we haven't left you without any food. The fridge is full. There's money on the sideboard, and I don't mind if you have some friends over tonight. Just a few, mind. No house parties. Simon frowned. Mum, I'm not a baby. I'm 16, and you'll be back by tomorrow afternoon anyway. That's right, in time for us to spend Christmas Day together. She had a chirpy grin spread across her lips as she said it, the holiday spirit sparking some inner insanity now present all over her face. A car beeped its horn outside the front gate. It was Simon's stepfather, huddled beneath the wheel of his Mondeo Heatron full blast. He was impatient to leave. I'm sorry we have to go tonight, on Christmas Eve of all nights, but this session's very important to your... She stopped herself, almost falling headlong into a topic she wished to avoid. To Tom, for reviving his career. Who's he playing for? Arlene looked puzzled. Some music executive's ball, apparently. You're not sure, said Simon. Didn't you check? Well, the organisers paid us a great deal of money in advance, which was good enough for Tom. Simon's new stepfather, Tom Sheldon, was a musician, and quite a popular one at that. He'd released a few albums, like 20 years ago, and had jammed with all the greats of his day. He'd even been inducted into a musical hall of fame somewhere. Simon should have loved having him around, but he didn't. Despite being impractically rebellious for his age, he just saw Tom for what he was, a washed-up rock star on the downward slope to obscurity. At least he'd recorded a festive track in his heyday. It kept the royalty checks coming through the mail. Every time they'd step out shopping to some 2-bit mall, from September to December, Tom's song, Krampus Delivers, would be in their playlist somewhere, usually edited down for obscene content. Boy, did that make Tom mad. Despite the fact he'd recorded very little new material in the past 2 decades, he still considered himself an artist at the very forefront of his game. Truth is, he'd never been at the forefront of anything in his life. Not really. One day, while shopping for groceries in a nearby megamarket, the cut-down version of Krampus Delivers started playing over the speaker system, and he just snapped. Leaving Simon and his mother, Arlene, in the aisles, he stormed up to the checkout and demanded to speak to the store manager. Most of the kids manning the tills were temporary Christmas staff. They didn't know who the manager was. It was unlikely he or she would put themselves out to welcome a bunch of no-hoper teens working for minimum wage. The duty manager had that precious responsibility. The girl on the checkout rang a bell. Then they both just stood there in silence for the next 10 minutes, waiting for him to arrive. It didn't look like anyone could be bothered to respond. Either that, or they were too busy, short-staffed as usual. Tom's face turned an unfriendly shade. "Can you try ringing again?" he barked, temper frayed. Her eyes flicked up to acknowledge him, but her body never moved. She pressed the buzzer again. She had a stick of gum in her mouth and was chewing it furiously. "Do you have to make that nasty sound?" said Tom, pointing to her cheeks. "If you just stay calm, sir, somebody will be here to deal with you soon." Her voice sounded robotic, like the talking self-service tills nearby, yet with less humanity in its tone. "If you raise your voice to me again, I'll have to call security." Her hand moved under the desk, like she wanted him to do it. It had been a pretty boring day for her by all accounts. Since Tom had spoken to her in such a rude way, seeing him ejected on his arse would probably give her something to smile about again. I just want to talk to the manager about the music, that's all. It won't take long. I'm afraid we don't cater for special requests, she said, sarcasm oozing from every pore, her body language screaming, I don't give a fuck. Tom's body temperature increased, lighting him up like the bright star they had jammed onto their tree the night before, smouldering plastic on top of a nice symmetrical stack of pine kindle. You can guess what happened that year, when they arrived home to find Arlene had left the lights plugged in. At least the fire brigade had poured them flasks of tea to keep them warm, while their possessions turned into cinders and wafted up into the night sky before their eyes. The room they'd stayed in hadn't been too plush, though. I'm giving you a final warning, young lady. If you don't get someone immediately, you're going to have a lawsuit on your hands. One of those tracks you're playing, I own, and I don't like to hear my work edited out of existence. Suddenly the girl seemed to take notice of him again. Wow, really? Which track's yours? The band were the Screaming Joygasms, and the song's called Krampus Delivers. She looked disappointed. Ah, yeah, that one. I've been telling them to take it off for days now. But really, though, that was you? Tom looked offended. Arlene could see where his conversation with the checkout girl was headed, and left Simon with their basket, so she could defuse the situation before it escalated any further. Too late. Way too late. What's that supposed to mean? Tom shouted, losing all self-control. That track is a bloody classic. Better than your stupid rap rubbish and those pretty emo boys you fancy, glistening everywhere. They don't even sing live anymore. That sound you listen to, that makes you want to hook up with them? It's a machine. You want to sleep with a synthesizer. Did you know that? Simon could see the security guard making his way over to the till area. How embarrassing, just so Tom could prove a point. It was his mum he felt sorry for, having to stick up for him all the time. There were other fish in the sea. She just hadn't extended her net far enough to catch them. Simon hoped she'd have gotten over her teenage obsession and thrown this one back in the water by now, but it was coming up to their 3-year anniversary together. Tom blew the car horn again, winding down the window, this time to shout into the passage. For God's sake, Arlene, we don't have all night. It's a 3-hour journey. She gave him a chastising glance. Okay, I'm coming. So you're okay if we go now? Simon gave her the most angelic smile he could muster that would have reassured anyone's mother. I'll see you tomorrow, Trouble, she said, smiling, ruffling his carefully spiked hair. Simon could tell he hadn't fallen one bit. Arlene turned toward the front door and stepped out into the frosty night air. Suddenly, Simon was taken over by a strange feeling, like déjà vu. Don't be late home, okay, or I'll have to ground you. She laughed. I remember that. Simon watched her walk down the path and over to the car door in her fake fur. He had this weird sensation he couldn't shake. For some inexplicable reason, he felt compelled to watch her make it to the car safely. Oh, he needed to cut the apron strings. He was a big boy now and was too old to be frightened every time Mummy decided to go away somewhere. He shut the front door and took out his mobile. It was time to call in his party troops and really declare independence. First he called Vince. He was always up for a good time and was the only member of Simon's group who looked old enough to get served alcohol at the local off-licence. I'm coming over, he said over the phone, sounding excited. I've got some money saved away for that school trip next week. Just make sure the others divvy up when I get there, okay? You know what a cheap bunch they can be when they're broke. Leave it to me, Simon told him. If anyone comes who can't pay, I'm sending them back home to their porn collection and right arm. They can find some other way to entertain themselves tonight. Have you invited anyone yet? Vince asked. Everyone, Simon told him, sniggering. They're just waiting for me to confirm, but you got to help me tidy the place up and keep the place tidy. We can't let any first years sneak in and trash it. They're not mature enough for this kind of thing, so tell your brother he can't come. Vince's brother, John, was listening in. What the fuck, he heard him say. You got Si's message, right? He said you ain't coming. Right arm porn for you, little one. Vince had his mobile on speakerphone mode. He leaned into the mic. I'm not cleaning up afterwards, though, he told Simon. Get someone else to sort it out. I'm picking up the booze, remember? Simon moved his other hand to his head to push back his spiky hair. You want this party, you got to be part of the clean-up crew. If this place looks like a tip when my folks get back tomorrow, then it's no more parties in Simon's yard, ever. You get me, fam? The other end of the line went quiet. I'm serious. How badly do you want this shindig to occur? Alright, I'll help clean up, said Vince. His little brother was laughing in the background. You got played, bruv. Cool for just one night, then tomorrow you're a bin man. Shut up, his brother warned, or I'll repeat what I did to you last week. And before you come out with it, I don't care what Mum says. What did you do to him? Simon asked. Vince started laughing, almost unable to reply. It's not funny, John said, grumbling. I knotted his school tie around one of the bus poles so he couldn't get off with the rest of us. He ended up at the bus depot. They didn't know he was on board. He was up on the top deck. They nearly shut him in for the night. Simon started laughing, so hard he nearly dropped his phone. Oh my God, classic, bruv. You should have seen him when Mum found out, John bitched. He was nearly crying. Classic, bruv. Vince moved his hand from the side of the bed to clip his brother around the ear. He was laying down watching a video on their laptop. Some American guy climbed out the window of his SUV whilst it was still going, trying to steer it with one arm still inside the vehicle. Unluckily, he swerved onto the pavement and hit a lamppost, sending him careering down the road on his head. Ouch, said John, for the guy on the screen. Have you seen this one? He turned the laptop around so his brother could see it. Vince lowered his backhand and checked out the heading. No, I haven't. You seen a video online called Dumb Guy Drives Car from the Outside? Vince asked Simon. Don't think so. I'll check it later after I've finished finalising everything. His face page's still offline. Totally down. Night at the party as well, so we'd better get cracking. Hey, before you go, what time do you want me around? Simon looked at the clock on his mobile. It's 5 now, so let's say 8. Being Christmas Eve, most people are going to have to be home early for the family thing tomorrow. Finish at 2 or 3. But everyone's got to bring a front door key. Let themselves back in when they get home. I don't want any parents phoning here, complaining their kid woke them up in the early hours. I got it. I'll let as many people know as I can. What's the cover story? Kidnapped by Santa? Elves stole them from their houses? What? Simon considered. Tell them they could come clean about being here and that my mum's overseeing things. I've already asked Sandra from school to fake her voice if any parents do phone in. I'll text her. She should be here in half an hour. She's been left home alone too. Her mum's in Spain on some photo shoot thing. Nice. Well, lucky fella. You got 3 minutes? Simon asked. Nah, said Vince. But my dad has. He never uses them anyway. He doesn't have any friends to call except for his work colleagues. I'll call around now. Cool, Simon agreed, promptly hanging up so he could ring around himself. Once he got all of his amigos on side, they would let everyone else know the festivities were definitely on. He just had to make sure that he made those last few calls. Then wait.
Entering Retirement by L.A. Sykes. You're sat at your desk and doing one-fingered typing with a deliberate, slow procession because you hate to type, and you hate computers, and you hate the paperwork the watchdogs put unbridled faith in. Because it's typed and filed and fiddled and fondled and punched and signed and dated. It's bomb-proof for the suits far away, farting and sipping coffee in their offices, moaning about the deluge of emails and incident report forms they have to sign off because their life is so hard. You're grateful there's a student in the office for the next few weeks because they give off enthusiasm, which is a cherished rarity because they haven't had to be tied down to the typing and computers and paperwork and filing and fiddling and fondling and punching and signing and dating and dealing with suits far away in offices moaning and farting and slurping. You're grateful the student's mentor is your long-standing colleague and now a friend of the family because she still has faith in the profession despite a growing caseload and a pay freeze as the country enters a double-dip recession and blames the slump caused by bailing out bankers on the likes of you and her who are draining the public money pool despite earning a fifth of the suits far away farting and sipping coffee looking for one of you to blame when another incident report form pings into their email. You can't remember the specific details of why you became a social worker, but you have a vague notion about doing something worthwhile with your time and ideals and making a difference since coming out of the army, giving lives back to people instead of taking them away. You wonder sometimes if it was a subconscious way of balancing things out when you're hunkered over the keyboard, but you shrug your shoulders and leave that kind of guessing to the pie-in-the-sky psychologists. You're both relieved and proud when your long-standing colleague and friend comes over to your desk with the student asking you to go out and try to make rapport with a new case. It isn't safe for a female to go alone, so they come to you, and the student is eager to see the man everyone goes to crack the difficult cases in action. You drive into town, and the student's asking questions about social theory and systemics, and you give rote answers, pretending you know what she's talking about while you daydream about selling up and cruising white sand inlets in the Mediterranean sun with the wife. You stop off at a row of 3-story flats and honk at the group of daytime boozers in street gear who circle your car like vultures and look like savages but speak in friendly tones with eloquent thank you sirs and good grace and a couple of nice to see yous thrown in that helps the student who is on edge in the passenger seat relax a little. They tell you the lad you're looking for is not in great shape substance misuse-wise, and he's been seen loitering outside the town's public toilets, and you force a smile and thank the group, and tell them to stay safe, then both you and the student silently cruise into town. You tell the student to wait in the car, parked right across from the police station, and your stomach feels unusual, twisting inside. You slide open the toilet door, and the stench waters your eyes, and you hear grunting coming from behind a graffiti-covered cubicle door. You stand frozen to the spot until the cubicle door creaks open on rusting hinges, and a uniformed copper comes out with a flushed face. You're getting on, but you still remember to throw from the hips as you drive your fists into the cop's body, deliberately avoiding the face so he won't get demoted or transferred to hush up a scandal, and instead he'll stick around and tell any others it ain't a safe patch anymore, and then you throw him outside and turn back to the lad. You try and get through to him with basic explanations of who you are, and that you remember helping his big brother a few years back, and you can do the same for him, but you can tell he's not with it, and he's looking at you funny, looking through you, through dilated pupils, and you think he's hearing something else besides your voice, but you can't hear anything but a steady dripping of urine from the busted urinal. He tells you it's a tenner for a blowjob, and you take a step back, putting your hands up and shake your head, and tell him he needs to listen to what you're saying, but he doesn't trust you, and tells you he thinks you're playing a game to snatch him or something. You're getting on, and you've still power, but you're not as speedy as you were, and he pulls out a small knife, and he's too quick, and you feel nothing then, a ripping sting as he slices your belly open, and punctures your lungs, and you're choking on your own blood, and he's gone, and you're collapsed on the floor of a public toilet, and your vision's fading, but you can make out "Hope Springs Eternal" written in slanting felt tip on a tile on the wall, and underneath in a different scrawl of excrement, yet damnation clogs the wellspring. You wish it was someone else who was the one who cracks the difficult cases, and the pain worsens when you realize in a fleeting moment of clarity you would trade places and put anyone in this situation to save yourself, because you want to see the shimmering reflection of the sun on the low rolling blue Mediterranean waves, and you forgot about the student until you hear the door open and hear piercing screams.
Hey, we're here with Reagan Keeter, sci-fi fantasy thriller writer. Hey, thanks for stopping by, Reagan.
Thank you for having me.
What are your influences? Are there any movies or books, writers who have influenced your style?
I would say Dean Koontz, Neil Schulman, and Michael Crichton. In fact, it was Crichton's book Sphere that many years ago first inspired me to start writing.
So, what was the inspiration behind your story, Out of the Well?
Well, the idea of a child falling down a well is fairly common. In fact, you'll probably, if you're old enough, remember hearing when you were growing up all the jokes about Lassie, Timmy fell down a well. Anyway, I kind of thought, what if we turned that idea on its head? How bad could things really be?
So what's going on with the film that you co-wrote? Strange Things?
That was my first and frankly only attempt at humor. The co-author and I submitted it to a contest. It came in as a quarter-finalist. However, screenplays in general I find to be limiting in the sense that it takes a whole team to put it together to make it a deliverable product for somebody to enjoy. And I really like the idea of being able to tell a story that is played out within a reader's imagination, and thus enjoy writing books and short stories much more.
I've been reading about you, and it says here that you've received a grant from the DeKalb Council for the Arts to produce a series of fiction for children. Can you tell us anything about those stories?
That was a very enjoyable project. I wrote a series of short stories covering a variety of topics, including the Loch Ness Monster. The purpose of the stories was to be both entertaining and educational, and I was fortunate enough to get to go around to a number of elementary schools in the Atlanta area and read the stories to children, and then, quiz them afterwards by having them raise their hand and throwing out candy to the kids who got it right. It was a lot of fun.
Do you think the type of stories that you tell has been affected by where you grew up at?
I would have to say that without a doubt, where you grow up and your life experience affects your stories. Certainly it affects your sense of setting and environment. I think, though, probably what has a bigger effect on the stories themselves are your experiences. For example, my best friend and I commonly went into abandoned, boarded up houses, places that had burned down, sewer tunnels, basically anywhere we weren't supposed to go, and anywhere that might be a little bit creepy. And exploring those environments, I'm sure, got into my imagination much more than any city could. I think I've also been affected by the 6 years I spent living abroad, largely in Prague and Bucharest. And I think that the greater or the broader your experience in life, the more inspiration you have to pull on for plot ideas and characters and so on.
Well, Reagan, you've had your debut book released. Tell everyone about it.
It's called Probability Chain. After confronting an intruder in his house, 18-year-old Brian Dorr runs for the gun he keeps under the bed. However, instead of finding it, he finds a note that says, "The police will get here in time." Not only is the mysterious author right, this note is only the beginning of a series of strange events that will quickly propel him into another dimension, challenging his ideas of reality and time, and starting him on a journey of discovery that will forever change his life.
Yeah, where did the idea come from?
One day, I read this article about a highly regarded physicist called Hugh Everett. He put forth an idea, it was called the many worlds theory, which provides an explanation for a long-standing problem in quantum mechanics with regards to particle predictability. In simplicity, the theory states that everything which can happen does happen, but it's especially interesting that every interaction we have with the world around us creates new dimensions where every other choice we could have made plays out. And while it sounds like science fiction, what's really cool about his theory is that he provided the mathematics to prove it.
Where can I get a copy?
Listeners to this podcast can read it for the next week for free at reagankeeter.com/probabilitychain. No dashes, underscores, anything like that. And just so there's no confusion about the spelling, it's REGANKEETER.com/probabilitychain. Now and after that, if you want to read it or want to hold on to it for a longer period of time, you can download it from Amazon for 99 cents.
So what other stories have you published?
I published a number of short stories. One of my favorites is called Out of the Well. You can actually hear it on this podcast.
Okay, Reagan. I understand you're going to read from your new novelette.
Probability Chain, Chapter 1. When the shape of a young woman began to materialize in the middle of the intersection at Peachtree and Piedmont, 6 lanes of traffic going more than 40 miles per hour came to a screeching halt. Car slammed into car as space itself seemed to ripple, to stretch. Although translucent and fuzzy at first, she gained form quickly, and as she did, it became clear to all who could see her that she was badly injured, possibly near death. Hunched over and naked, she held her hands to her bloody neck while cars swerved, horns blared, and steel grinded against steel. When later questioned by the police, only one of the drivers dared admit that the woman had appeared out of nowhere. The rest claimed they just hadn't seen her. The answers, though disappointing, were no surprise to the officers. With street lamps, headlights, lighted billboards, and neon signs making the darkness of night darker and the brightness of light brighter, drivers were often unaware of how little they actually saw once the sun went down. But while the question of her origin was important, it was not the question on anybody's mind in the moments that followed her appearance. Instead, the only question witnesses asked themselves as they stepped from their cars, slack-jawed, was whether this mysterious woman was going to live. A mother dressed in khaki pants and a blue blouse grabbed a blanket from her trunk and ran toward the stranger, shouting, "Call an ambulance! Somebody call an ambulance, goddammit!" She kneeled beside the young woman, wrapping the blanket around her and placing her hands on top of the stranger's throat to try to slow the bleeding. As she did, the young woman looked up at her with desperate blue eyes. Her lips moved to form the name Brian, but no sound came out.
There will be a link to the book on Goodreads, and I urge everyone to go there and leave a rating or a review of the book. Thanks for coming by the...
Thank you again for having me on.